There was a sound, not thunder, not bells, but something in between, low, rhythmic, unnatural. It came from the chapel, but no one was inside. The sky was clear, but the windows shook, like something had passed through. At 4:06 a.m., St. Mary's went silent. The light above the altar flickered twice, then went out completely. By sunrise, the entire convent was empty. 23 nuns, gone without a trace. Their beds were untouched, but their robes, perfectly folded, left behind like ritual offerings, on linen sheets that still held body heat. No signs of escape, no broken locks, no blood, just a lingering scent of smoke, wax and iron. The front gate remained open, but no footprints led out. They didn't run, they didn't drive, they simply disappeared. Then the records began to vanish. Parish files, erased, baptism logs, burned, the priest assigned to St. Mary's, relocated in silence, the chapel, boarded shut by order of the diocese, the official statement. Transferred for reasons of spiritual unrest. But they never said where, or why, or what spiritual unrest meant. Only one clue ever surfaced. A girl, 11 years old, claimed she saw them, walking barefoot through the orchard that night, each holding a candle, each whispering the same word again and again. Liberare, to free. But no one wanted to ask what they were freeing themselves from, because that would mean looking deeper, and everyone who did either lost their faith or lost their mind. This wasn't an accident. This was a ritual, a purging, and the church didn't bury it because they knew what happened. They buried it because they didn't. The land St. Mary's was built on was never just soil and stone. It was an inheritance, a forgotten ruin, gifted to the church in 1831 by a dying noblewoman with no family, no grave and no explanation. They called it a donation, but old letters refer to it as a debt repaid. She had one condition, written in Latin, seared in red wax: no men may reside. The church accepted without hesitation, but the locals, they knew better. They whispered that before the convent was built, there were already foundations, already carvings in the rock, already symbols no priest could translate. When the builders tried to tear down the original structure, tools broke, workers bled, and blue flame was seen, rising from the well beneath the chapel floor. The blue flame was never extinguished, only hidden. They sealed the well with an altar and told the nuns to pray twice as hard when kneeling before it. But prayer wasn't enough, because every few years a new sister would fall ill, not in body, but in mind. They would stop speaking, begin drawing spirals, lash themselves at night and repeat phrases not found in scripture. The church blamed female hysteria. Medicine called it shared delusion. But the pattern was undeniable, always on the third night of October, always the same scream echoing through the walls, always the same phrase scratched into their bedroom floors, liberare. And then, a silence that stretched for days, weeks, until they were gone, either by transfer, by suicide, or by complete institutional erasure. This cycle repeated for decades until the night 23 disappeared at once. No signs of struggle, no farewell letters, just the same blue flame seen again by a farmhand passing by. He said it wasn't light. He said it was a shape, something rising from the chapel, twisting as it rose, like smoke with a face, and it was watching him. They told him he imagined it, but he never returned to that field.
ever spoke to his own family again, and died a year later, muttering a single word under his breath, liberare. There's something about blue fire that makes your breath catch, something unnatural, unholy, like it burns without needing to, like it remembers. The last confirmed sighting of the nuns was during evening vespers, 23 voices chanting in perfect harmony in a chapel no outsider was allowed to enter. At 6:47 p.m., the bells rang once, then stopped mid-swing. The bell tower cross tilted without wind. A thick fog rolled in from the east, blotting out the sun faster than the sunset ever could. By 7:04, the candles inside St. Mary's burned black. By 7:10, silence. No sound from the convent. No movement on the grounds. No response to knocking. At 7:33, a groundskeeper forced open the main chapel door and found nothing but dust in the air, like someone had shaken an old book. The pews were still warm, the altar still smelled of incense, but not a single soul remained. 23 women, gone. No blood, no bodies. Only one thing remained in the center aisle, a single walking stick, carved from ash wood, wrapped in white cloth, with a spiral burned into the top, the same spiral the afflicted sisters had drawn for years. A priest from Sacramento was called in. He took one look and turned away. He ordered the convent sealed, the documents locked, and a new wall built over the chapel entrance. His final report used only 3 words: non investigare ultra. Do not investigate further. But someone did. A young seminarian assigned to clean out the convent library found a leather-bound volume hidden behind a false wall. It was filled with names, symbols, dates. Every 10 years, always in October, a ritual held, always by women, always ending in disappearance. The last page was blank, except for a final line, written in the same spiraling script the sisters scratched into the floor: "We were not the first, we will not be the last." And that seminarian, he vanished too. 3 days later, only his shoes were found, outside the chapel door, facing in. They said it was just a convent, brick walls, quiet halls, women of faith bound by silence. But the deeper you step into the records, the older things get, and the less it looks like religion and more like containment. St. Mary's wasn't built by the church, not originally. It was built in 1831, on top of something else, an abandoned settlement whose name was erased from county archives in 1876. The ground beneath the convent still carries the foundations of another structure, older than any official record, a circle of stone, 12 pillars, and 1 center slab, carved with the same spiral, the same ashwood sigil, found on the walking stick left behind. No one talks about what St. Mary's was before it was St. Mary's, but old maps show something. A Latin phrase, faded, half erased. Domus silenti, the house of silence. And it always housed women. No men allowed past the gates, no visitors permitted after sunset. What were they guarding? What had they sworn never to speak? And why in 1998, just after the disappearances, did the diocese issue a sealed order, relocating every nun in the surrounding counties, with no explanation? The land was sold, not to another church, but to a private holding company with no listed address. A concrete wall was erected, 12 feet high, barbed wire, surveillance. No one goes in. No one comes out, and yet locals swear they hear sounds, Gregorian chants. At 3 a.m., low humming, like bees trapped in stone. A light, blue, glowing through the cracks at the base of the wall. One child claimed to see women, in long white habits, walking in circles around the property, chanting without mouths. But by morning, the footprints were gone. Only the spiral remained, drawn in salt on the asphalt, and no matter how many times they scrub it away, it always returns, each October without fail. They searched for them. Of course they did. Police, state troopers, even the National Guard was called for a day, but you wouldn't know it from the paperwork, because after 2 weeks the reports stopped. No missing persons files, no follow-up interviews, no public statements from church officials, only a single news clipping buried in the county archive titled, "Unverified absence of staff at local parish." Unverified absence. As if 23 women had just wandered off, as if they were never there. But locals remember. They remember the food deliveries stopping overnight, the parish bell never ringing again, the lantern in the attic window extinguished. They remember the sound. One final, unearthly wail, echoing through the pines, the night before the convent went dark. And they remember the dogs, how they wouldn't go near the gates for weeks, how they whimpered at things no one could see. One old groundskeeper, the last man allowed inside those gates, spoke only once. He said, "They were called." Then he burned every journal he ever kept, moved to Oregon, died 2 months later. Heart exploded in his sleep, and in the ashes of those journals were pages the fire wouldn't take. Pages with diagrams, spirals, a map of the convent, and markings around the central chamber. 12 sigils, one unmarked, the same as the slab under the floor. We don't know what they found, but we know what followed. Each woman left something behind, a rosary on her pillow, an open Bible, always turned to the same page, Psalm 88, a psalm of abandonment, of darkness, of being forgotten even by God. Thou hast laid me in the lowest pit, in darkness, in the deeps. What convent trains its sisters to mark their departure with a psalm of forsaking? Unless they weren't leaving, unless they were surrendering, not to faith, but to something older, something beneath, something that wanted them to vanish completely, silently, as if they were never there. The convent wasn't just a place of worship, it was a boundary, a seal, built on ground that was never meant to be blessed, only hidden. You have to understand, St. Mary's wasn't built because the land was holy. It was built because something underneath it had to be kept quiet. Old records suggest the convent's location wasn't chosen by Rome, but by a much older order, a forgotten sect, buried even deeper than the church's memory. They called themselves Custodes Tenebris, keepers of the dark, and the nuns. They weren't assigned. They were selected, girls with no families, no attachments, orphaned during war, traumatized by life, chosen for how little the world would miss them, and trained not just in prayer, but in ritual. There are whispers that some sisters never spoke aloud in the halls, only chanted beneath the altar, while others fasted in rooms without light, for days at a time. Discipline, obedience, erasure. This wasn't worship. It was containment. One declassified Vatican memo, accidentally leaked during a 1973 archive fire, referenced the convent crypts as a system of spiritual pressure valves. And below that, handwritten in red ink, never all at once. 23 women disappearing all at once. That wasn't a failure. That was a release, a ritualized letting go of the seal, a collective sacrifice. And it worked, because after that night the noises stopped. No more rumbling beneath the chapel, No more flickering lights in the bell tower. No more voices echoing in the east wing, where no one lived, but peace is a deception, a silence that waits, because what was held there, what fed on prayers and fasting and forgotten girls, has not been destroyed. It was fed, and fed things return stronger, and they remember the taste of devotion, of fear, of flesh willingly offered in the name of duty. Now there's nothing left, just a sealed building, a rusted gate, and a sign that reads, "Close." Ed for renovation since 1997. But some nights you'll see candlelight in the windows, in rooms with no electricity, and if you listen closely, you'll hear them, whispering the psalm, one voice at first, then two, then 23, in perfect unison, calling back what was never meant to be freed. The town never tore the convent down. They didn't sell the land. They didn't develop it. They didn't even question it. They just pretended it was never there, like a wound you cover with a bandage, and pray never opens again. But wounds fester when ignored, and buildings don't stay silent forever. Ask the boys who broke in on a dare, 99. 4 seniors from St. Augustine's, armed with a flashlight, a camcorder, and teenage arrogance. They thought they'd film ghosts. They didn't come back. Only the tape did, shoved under the church door 2 days later, wrapped in cloth, soaked through with something black. The footage. Unusable, static, distortion, but one frame stood out. 4 boys kneeling in a row, eyes closed, mouths sewn shut, and behind them a woman in a habit, face obscured, but arms stretched wide, as if welcoming something unseen. Police called it a prank. Said the boys ran away. Case closed. No search, no headlines, but the parish changed overnight. Mass attendance dropped. People stopped walking past the gate. Families moved out without explanation. And the priest who received the tape. He hung himself in the bell tower a week later. The only thing he left behind, a single line written on the chapel wall in his own blood. They were never nuns. That phrase appears again, years later, scrawled in charcoal on the walls inside a Chicago homeless shelter, where a woman was found muttering prayers in Latin, tearing pages from the Book of Job, and swallowing them. Her identity? Unconfirmed, but her fingerprints matched someone declared dead in 1987. A nun from St. Mary's. One of the 23 still alive, or something wearing her skin, and she's not the only one. They say if you stay near the convent past midnight, you'll hear them. Not walking, floating. Their footsteps don't make noise, because they're not bound by the ground anymore. They're not here to serve. They're here to retrieve, and they always take what they came for. In silence, with mercy, or without it. The chapel doors at St. Mary's were never locked. Not even once. Not during the famine, not during the wars. Not even when the last priest vanished in 1958. They always stayed open, because something inside wanted them open. People thought that was holy. They thought it meant sanctuary, but they didn't read the carvings above the frame. They were old, older than the convent itself. Latin, yes, but not scripture. A warning. Open unto them, and be unmade. Local stonemason who tried to sand it off? Hands bled for weeks, split down the palm like crucifixion wounds. He said it felt like something inside his skin didn't want the words erased. He stopped showing up to work, then to church,
then to life. By the time they found him, he'd pulled all his teeth out, arranged them in the shape of a cross, and carved, "Sister Agnes forgives me," into the plaster above his bed. There is no record of a Sister Agnes, but that name appears in 7 separate confessions spanning nearly a century, all from people who had never met. Sister Agnes, always the same description: white veil, no feet, eyes that don't blink. Some say she appears in mirrors. Others say she speaks through rosaries. Whispers Latin backward. She isn't a ghost. She's something else. Something older than vows, older than Rome, older than guilt itself. There's an entire sealed wing beneath St. Mary's. No blueprints, no key. But one nun, the last one seen alive, wrote something in the margins of a hymn book. 4 words, shaky, bleeding ink. Below is not hell. That hymn book was found in the hands of a blind orphan girl years later. She was singing a song no one taught her, in a language no one recognized. Her throat opened wide, but her lips never moved, and when she stopped, she turned her face to the wall and said, "They aren't buried. They're waiting." There's a photograph, black and white, faded by time, stored deep in the diocesan archives in Sacramento. It shows 23 women in habits, standing outside St. Mary's, hands folded, eyes fixed on the camera. Except when you stare long enough, you realize one of them isn't facing forward. One nun is turned slightly, as if she heard something behind her, or didn't want to be seen. And if you magnify it, her mouth isn't closed, it's open. Mid-sentence, mid-warning. Some archivists said the original negative was damaged, but others, priests who were there when the photo was first printed, they said her face was clear once until the night after the convent collapsed. They say the image changed, not degraded, changed, like it rewrote itself. The Vatican requested the photo back, classified it under mulieres non redierunt, women who did not return, but that classification doesn't appear in any modern canon. It's older, tied to events that were never officially recorded, only whispered about, like the Silent March in 1891, when over 100 nuns walked barefoot across the Pyrenees and were never seen again, or the Sisters of St. Annalise, who, according to one survivor, walked into the sea to meet something that called them by name. This isn't just about St. Mary's. It's a pattern, and the pattern speaks in symbols. The chapel floor has one, a 7-pointed spiral carved beneath the pews, never seen by parishioners, because the pews were nailed down from the beginning, but when restorers pulled the wood for termite treatment in 1996, they found it, fresh as if it had just been carved. One of the workers touched the center of the spiral with his palm. He went missing 3 days later. They found his body in a silo 60 miles away, but no one knows how he got there, because there were no roads, no tracks, and his boots were clean. Only his tongue had been removed. On his arm, written in C. Harcoal. Follow the veil, not a veil. The veil, there is only one, and it did not stay buried with the others. It was the youngest nun, Sister Amelia, barely 22, born in Fresno, educated in silence, raised to never question the vow. She was the last one seen walking into the chapel before the mass disappearance. But what made her stand out wasn't her youth, or her brilliance, or her beauty. It was her doubt. A single crack in her faith, documented in a private confession, recorded by Father Bellamy 2 nights before the event. He never told anyone about it, until his hands started peeling, skin sloughing off, as if scorched by invisible fire. He claimed in his final written letter that Amelia came to him after prayers and asked one question, a question that made his rosary beads snap.
"Father, what if the voice we hear isn't God at all?" The tape was erased, but the wax transcript remained. He buried it under the floor of the old confessional in a sealed box marked Dies Sine Lux, Day Without Light. Amelia was never seen again. But her journal resurfaced during the demolition of a convent wall in 2008. 12 pages, written in red pencil, as if in haste, as if with something behind her. One page simply reads, over and over. Do not open your eyes during the second hymn. Over 100 repetitions. Another page has a crude drawing of the chapel, but with no roof. Instead, above the altar, she drew a mouth, not a symbol, not a metaphor. A mouth, wide, open, lined with nails, singing, and behind that, what appeared to be stars, but not our stars, no constellation matched. Astronomers who examined the sketch said the star positions matched nothing observable from Earth, past or present, as if it were drawn by someone who saw the sky from somewhere else. This is why the Vatican sealed the case, why the records were falsified, why St. Mary's was declared unstable and torn down, because if Amelia was right, then the veil they wore wasn't to honor God, it was to keep something out of sight. Or maybe to blind them before something could come through. Do you feel it yet? That pressure behind your eyes, as if something is watching. Stay focused. There's still more beneath the altar. They found the altar overturned, as if someone, or something, had clawed its way up from beneath, not broken, not cracked, but lifted, carefully, delicately, as if the stone had no weight at all. Underneath was not earth, not bedrock, but wood. Rotted planks, centuries old, but never before seen in any of the church's blueprints, carved into each plank, in a script even scholars feared to name. Not Latin, not Aramaic, not even the occult tongues whispered in forbidden monasteries. Something older, deeper, less like language, and more like a sound that keeps humming in your skull long after you stop listening. They pulled the boards apart, and beneath them, a spiral staircase descending into blackness with no end in sight. The team that entered never made it back. 3 men, 2 priests, and 1 camera operator. The footage was recovered, but without sound, only static, then a woman's whisper, so faint you'd miss it unless you turned the volume to the edge of pain. She says, "They're not nuns down here anymore." And then silence, no screams, no collapse, just the camera dropping to the stone floor, and a final frame of red footprints, ascending the stairs, bare, delicate, still wet, and too small to belong to any of the men who went down. The church denied the footage, said it was fabricated, a viral stunt, blasphemous, but one technician leaked it anonymously before going missing himself. He left behind a note scrawled on the back of a communion certificate. I saw her face in the static. She smiled at me. And next to the note, a symbol drawn in ash, the same one found in the burned wood above the altar, matching the drawings in Sister Amelia's journal, a spiral, not inward, but outward, as if something had already left and was never meant to return, or worse, was still watching, still waiting. And every chapel hymn wasn't a prayer. It was a call to open the door again. When they reopened the chapel for Mass, there were rules. No one enters alone. No one remains after dusk, and no one ever steps behind the altar. But they couldn't hide the scent, like wet stone and burnt lilies, like something ancient trying to pretend it was holy. The choir sisters refused to sing the closing hymn, said the notes made their teeth ache, said they could hear breathing behind the walls. One nun, Sister Evelyn, collapsed during prayer, clutching her chest, whispering, "She's walking again." The doctors called it hysteria, but her heartbeat was missing for 17 seconds. Flatlined, then restarted, but slower, like it was learning how to beat again. Not hers, but something else's. They kept her under surveillance, but that night, the cameras cut out at exactly 3:03 a.m., and when they flicked back on, Sister Evelyn was gone. No blood, no sound, no disturbance in the sheets, just a trail of communion wafers leading to the chapel stairs. The security guard on duty quit the next morning and burned his uniform in the parking lot. He said the wafers were damp, as if someone had sucked the blessing from them, and underneath each one, a single hair, long, white, and braided, exactly like the style worn by the missing sisters. That night every candle in the church relit itself. No wind, no hands, just fire, cold and blue. The bishop ordered an exorcist, but the priest they brought in walked in silent, stared at the altar, and wept. He said, "She's not in the ground anymore." He didn't explain. He didn't need to, because that night every clock in the convent stopped at 3:03, and the nuns who were still there woke with ash on their lips and hands folded in someone else's prayer. Not theirs, something older, something still praying, long after God had stopped listening. The bells began ringing at night, not on the hour, not for Mass, not for morning, but at 3:03 a.m., always 3:03. They said the ropes were untouched, yet the bells swayed as if moved by breath, low, dull, wrong, and it wasn't just the sound, it was what came after. Footsteps in the hall, measured, slow, bare, not from the floors above, but from beneath. The foundation of St. Mary's had long been sealed since the incident in 1891, when the lower crypts flooded with salt water, salt in the middle of farmland. They buried it with stone and scripture, poured holy water until the bricks split. But now the water was rising again. Not wet, not clear, thick, black, and humming. One nun, Sister Alina, opened her eyes during the night and found her bed floating, above the ground but not touching it, like something was holding it there just high enough to whisper underneath. She screamed, but her voice didn't echo. It sank, as if swallowed by the walls. When they found her, she had no memory of it, but she kept murmuring one word, "Below, below, below." They checked the cameras, they checked the floorboards, they checked the chapel. Nothing. No water, no footprints, no sound. Except one thing, on the door to the crypt, which hadn't been opened in over 100 years, a single handprint. Upside down, pressed in ash, and beneath it, scratched in deep, as if by bone or nail. Let them out. Not let me out. Let them. Who were they? And who had kept them locked away for so long? The convent was no longer silent, no longer sacred, and at 3:03 each night the bells kept ringing, even though no one was pulling the rope, even though the rope was now missing, replaced by braided hair. The rope was gone, but the sound of the bells still came, low, like it was under water, like something was dragging it from beneath. The hair. That thick braid tied where the bell rope once was, it was human. They tested it, and it belonged to Sister Clara. But Sister Clara was missing. Not dead, not buried, not recorded, She had never left the grounds. No one saw her leave. No door had opened. Her name was crossed out in the registry, but not by pen, by burning. A single ember had eaten through the parchment, right where her name used to be. And on her bed, under her pillow, they found a hymn book open to page 66. But all the notes, all the lyrics, were replaced with a different script. Not Latin, not Greek, older. It looked like letters trying to escape the page, twisted, alive, and beneath the last line, a smear of dried wax poured in a circle, with a small tooth placed in the center. They said, "Sister Clara was troubled, quiet, but never unstable, until the night she entered the garden and stayed kneeling for 7 hours, speaking to no one, eyes fixed on the well. That same well, sealed in 1913, after 3 novices drowned during a dry season. No water, but their lungs were full with something thicker. After that, the garden was blessed every year." But Clara said the blessing didn't hold anymore, she told the Mother Superior. They've begun whispering again, and she wasn't the only one. 3 more nuns, mute for years, suddenly began to hum the same melody from the page that burned. They hummed it in their sleep, in the confessional, in the laundry, in the rain, and each time they did, the shadows moved in reverse, not falling with the sun, but climbing it, like something rising that shouldn't be allowed to rise. They locked the hymn book away, sealed it in a lead box, buried it beneath the altar, but every morning it was back, on the steps of the chapel, dry, open, waiting, and no one dared to touch the tooth again, because by then they had realized it wasn't Clara's. There was a mark beneath the tooth, etched into the wood of the chapel floor, not carved, not painted, branded, a spiral with 13 lines, all leading to a single point. And when the morning light hit it, the spiral didn't reflect. It absorbed, like the wood wasn't wood anymore, but something deeper, older, hungrier. They called in a priest from outside the order, someone not bound by their vows of silence. Someone who had seen this before. Father Lucian came, with one eye clouded white and fingers that trembled when he touched the chapel walls. He said only one thing after entering. "You didn't build this place." They told him he was wrong. They showed him the architectural plans, the blueprints from 1883. They traced the bricks, named every donor, but he refused to listen. "The stone is older than the convent," he said. "This place was chosen, not constructed." And he begged them not to ring the bell again. Too late, because on the 14th night the bell rang by itself, 3 times, slow, like breaths held too long. And when the sisters ran to the tower, they found the rope reattached, not with nails, but stitched with hair matching every one of the missing, 1 lock per stitch, braided tight, wet, still smelling of incense and rain. The spiral mark was now in the nave, drawn in wax, with small teeth placed at each of the 13 lines, all human, all from the mouth of the living. Sister Agnes, who had never spoken, began to scream. She clawed at her teeth, ripped 2 out and held them in her hands, whispering the same word over and over again, "Return." No one knew what it meant, but the Father did. He took her aside, read a passage from a forbidden book, a book hidden in Vatican archives, never meant for public eyes. He said the spiral is not a symbol, it's a door, and the teeth are keys. And once the 13th tooth is placed, it opens inward, not out, and something steps through. That was never meant to be given shape. And now, 12 teeth were already in place. The 13th tooth was found in Sister Madeleine's bed, wrapped in a scrap of black cloth, stitched with thread too coarse to be cotton and too red to be dye. She hadn't spoken in 3 days, hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, just stared at the ceiling, mouthing something soundless. But when they tried to remove the tooth, her body convulsed and her jaw locked shut, as if sealing itself from the inside. They brought back Father Lucien, his hand shaking worse than before. He wouldn't even cross the chapel threshold. Instead, he pressed his face against the stained glass and whispered the name of a demon not written in any scripture. Virafine, he said it twice, and the wind outside changed direction. Not the trees, not the air, just the wind. It curled around the convent, as if circling, as if choosing. Inside, the spiral had spread, from the floor to the walls, to the backs of their hands. Every nun who remained bore it now, etched into their skin, not burned, not inked, but grown, raised like bone beneath the surface. And each night they heard a scraping beneath the floorboards, slow, deliberate, like fingernails on stone. Sister Agnes stopped screaming, but she didn't sleep. She sat in the hallway facing the bell tower, her eyes wide, never blinking, not once. She said she saw them, in the reflection of the glass, 12 shapes standing behind her, not moving, not speaking, just watching, waiting for the 13th. The convent was sealed, orders from the diocese, but even the bishop refused to come near. Letters went out, then were returned, unopened, stamped with one word: closed. The world outside turned its back, and inside, the spiral continued to grow. One night they found Sister Madeleine's bed empty, but the 13th tooth was gone, and the cloth it had been wrapped in was now nailed to the chapel door in the shape of a spiral, not hammered but pinned with human finger bones, one for each nun still brought, eating inside St. Mary's. But what terrified them most was that there were now 24 bones, and only 23 nuns had ever lived in the convent. One had never taken her vow, one had never been counted, never fed, never taught, never seen, but she had been there the whole time, waiting, behind the door that opens inward. They couldn't wash the blood out of the altar linen. They tried for hours. Hot water, soap, salt, prayers. They soaked it under the moonlight, left it in the chapel for 3 nights, folded it into a cross and left it in the sun. Nothing worked. The stain grew darker, and then it pulsed, like something still alive, still warm, still claiming what it touched. Father Callahan didn't want to call it a curse, but he refused to say its name. He said it out loud once, just once. Then he broke every mirror in the convent and wrote a letter to the bishop, smeared in candle wax and ash, begging for fire, asking for chains. He said the cloth was trying to breathe. He said it whispered at night when no one else was awake, when even the mice had stopped moving. So they took it to the garden behind the rectory, dropped it in an old barrel, lit the oil, and waited. At first nothing, then the fire turned blue, and the air smelled like salt and rotting sugar. And then a scream, no, not a scream, a sound that turned inside itself, like someone crying in reverse, like something drowning in its own mouth. The cloth didn't burn. It curled inward, folded into a spiral, then dropped to the bottom of the barrel like it had died, or gone to sleep. And the next morning, the convent well overflowed, but the water wasn't clear. It was thick, red, moving on its own, as if something beneath was breathing through it. The bishop ordered silence, told them to bury the barrel, to chain it in salt, to stop writing reports. He never came back, and neither did the church. The nuns who were left tore their habits into ropes, hung them from the rafters like warnings. Not banners, not decoration. Warnings, because something new had started walking the halls. Not a woman, not a man. Something older, faceless, but wearing the veil of the missing. They called it the sound that followed, not footsteps, not whispers, not the wind. It didn't echo. It absorbed everything. Every corridor it passed through went silent for days afterward. No birds, no creaking wood, no dripping from the pipes. Just nothing. One of the younger sisters, Agnes, woke up one night with her ear bleeding, not from injury, but from pressure, like something had spoken directly into her brain and left its heat behind. She said she saw a mouth in the dark, not floating, not attached to a face, just a mouth, wide, pale, shivering with breath that didn't belong to any living thing. It said, "The altar has been opened." It said, "You are the lambs that bled the gate awake." Then it vanished, and so did her shadow. Every time she stood in sunlight, nothing followed her feet. She screamed until her throat split, but the convent nurse didn't write it in the report because the ink in her pen turned to powder, and the page refused to hold her name. By morning, Agnes was gone, her bed untouched, except for 2 lines carved into the headboard. One was vertical, the other curved like a cipher, like a brand made for counting sacrifices. That was the third to disappear. And each time the sisters prayed louder, they laced their rosaries with thorns, left open Bibles on every window, slept with wax in their ears. But the sound didn't stop. It crept between the walls, tapped behind mirrors, hovered beneath the rafters, and when they sang hymns, it sang with them, not harmony, mockery, as if it remembered the music, from a time before choirs were born, a time when altars fed on bones, and the veil was worn not by brides, but by those chosen to be taken. They tried fasting, tried silence, tried exorcism without permission, but all it did was make the thing hungrier, more curious, more certain that it had been welcomed, not summoned, welcomed, and the sound began to speak again, this time with names. And every name it spoke faded from the convent records, the photographs, even from memory itself. One by one, the nuns became whispers of women, echoes with no source, hollow habits moving in candlelight, and no one dared to ask which name would be next. They tried sealing the chapel, 3 nails in every door, chains soaked in holy water, salt circles thick as rope, scripture etched into the glass, painted in ash and pressed beneath candles that never went out, but the doors still opened. Every night at exactly 3:12, no matter how many locks, no matter how many prayers, something opened them from the inside. Sister Eleonora said she watched it happen once. She was posted outside with a lantern, eyes wide open, heart thundering in her chest like it was trying to escape first. She said the door didn't creak, didn't shiver, didn't resist. It bowed inward like something vast had inhaled. And then it breathed out her name. She dropped the lantern, ran down the corridor, didn't stop until she vomited on the chapel floor. She said something followed her, not with footsteps, but with memory. She remembered things she never lived. Men screaming in Latin, chains pulling across stone, a girl in white forced to kneel beneath stained glass, and in every memory the sound of a bell that never rang in the convent. Eleonora changed after that. She stopped sleeping. Her eyes never blinked at the same time again. She refused communion, claimed the wafer tasted like grave soil. She disappeared the following Sunday, during Mass. In the middle of a hymn, she was standing with the others, Mouth open, no voice coming out. Then the candles all went dark. And when the flame came back, she was gone. Nothing remained but her veil, hung mid-air, like gravity forgot her for a moment. And beneath it, the floorboards were warped outward, as if something below had pulled her down. Without touching her body, the Mother Superior fell to her knees, not in prayer, but in surrender. She whispered, "The number is wrong. The number is wrong. We weren't 23. We were 24. But no one remembered a 24th. No one remembered anyone missing. But from that day, one extra chair was always pulled out in the dining hall, one toothbrush always wet in the washroom, one name tag always unreadable in the dormitory. The convent knew. Something else had joined them, but no one knew if it was always there, or if they had made it real by forgetting. The sound they all reported hearing wasn't a scream. It was humming, low, monotone, drifting from the chapel halls like a funeral dirge that never ended. And when Sister Therese returned to the rectory that morning, her face had changed, not just in expression, but in structure. Her eyes were glassed over, like something else was looking out from inside her. And she wouldn't speak, just stood barefoot in the snow, hands bloodied, muttering scripture that didn't exist in any Bible ever printed. The bishop was called in immediately, but what he did next wasn't what you'd expect. He didn't call the police. He didn't call for doctors. He called for bricks. 3 trucks of stone were ordered to the convent before dusk. The chapel was sealed shut from the outside. No records were kept. No media contacted. No one was told where the other 23 sisters had gone. Because here's the detail no one talks about. The convent ledger, the official record of every woman who lived, worked, or died there, was found in the bishop's private collection years later, and someone had gone through it, name by name, and drawn an X across every face, in thick red ink over every photograph, with one word written beside them in Latin, "Damnate, the damned." So ask yourself this: what did they hear in that chapel that drove them from prayer to disappearance? Why was Sister Therese the only one left standing? And why did the church try to erase not just their story, but their existence? The humming never stopped, and neither did the cover-up. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was a ritual sealed in silence and buried behind stone. But stones crack, records surface. And the truth, even the cursed kind, always finds its voice again. The humming stopped, but not because they stopped humming, something else entered. The sisters had performed these rituals since the convent was founded, and those rituals always brought silence, peace, and something close to divine presence. But this time, it brought something else. Inside the sealed chapel, with the altar dusted and the hymn books closed, a low vibration began under the floorboards. It didn't shake. It didn't rattle. It pulsed, like breath held too long, like something waking from the crawl space of centuries. One of the younger nuns, Sister Eloise, swore she saw movement in the shadows beneath the altar. Not flickering, not imagined. Movement, she said. Something looked back. The elder nuns hushed her, told her it was exhaustion, that she had not yet learned to look without fear. But she wasn't the only one who saw it. The journal kept by Sister Agnes, the oldest nun in the convent, described the exact same event. 2 weeks before it happened, she wrote, "When the hum breaks, the altar will split, and what sleeps beneath will open its mouth." Those were her words, dated before the chapel was even resealed, before the incident, before the disappearance. But no one noticed that page until it was too late. That night, the convent's bells rang once, then cracked and never rang again.
By morning, no one could enter the chapel. The door wasn't locked. It was sealed, like the wood itself had fused, as if the chapel had no intention of ever opening again. And still, from the inside, some say they could hear voices, low, unified, not humming anymore, chanting a new chant, not Latin, not any known language, but rhythmic, hypnotic, as if the women inside had been taught something, not by man, not by God, but by whatever lives beneath that altar, and feeds on silence. They didn't vanish, not in the way the news reported, not in the way the church denied. They were taken, or worse, they volunteered, because after centuries of devotion, maybe they wanted to meet what they were worshipping, face to face. Outside the chapel, the convent grounds fell silent. No birds, no breeze, no movement in the trees. Even the livestock in the nearby farms had gone still, as if something larger than sound, larger than weather, had swept through and told the world to hush. Father Remiel, the visiting priest assigned to oversee the convent's annual inspection, arrived 3 days later. The front gates were locked, which was strange, because they were never locked. But even stranger was that the key he had used for 10 years no longer fit. The iron felt warped, as if the metal itself had recoiled. He didn't panic, not at first. He walked the outer wall. He called out for Sister Agnes, Sister Eloise, anyone. No answer, until he passed the west-facing window of the chapel. There, etched in condensation, were numbers. 3 of them takes it 23. 0. That was all. He would later say that just looking at them made his nose bleed, like the numbers were more than just numbers, like they were coordinates or dates or something encoded into the stone of the chapel itself. When he finally got inside, through a rear servant entrance, he found no bodies, no mess, nothing. The beds were made, meals half prepared, chairs pushed back slightly, as if they had stood up. All at once, to follow something, the last known entry in the convent's logbook simply read, "They came." And below that, one phrase scrawled in shaking, urgent script, "We are not alone in this place." He closed the book, tried to take it with him, but no matter how far he walked, the book never left the grounds. It would reappear on the pulpit the next day, waiting, and no matter how many priests came, how many officials investigated, how many church archivists tried to redact the details, the book always came back. The chapel remained sealed, the bells remained silent, and the 23 nuns remained, gone. But something else was left behind, not a ghost, not a demon, something older. It didn't need a name, it already had theirs. 1 week later, a team was dispatched from the Diocese of Sacramento, not theologians, not clergy, but archivists, silent men with grey gloves and older eyes. They arrived in unmarked black vehicles, parked behind the orchard, and stepped out with metal cases. They didn't ask questions, they didn't pray. They measured, photographed, and recorded. The townspeople thought the nuns had simply left. Some said they relocated to a quieter convent in the east. But if that were true, why did the church seal the area with consecrated salt? Why were the original parishioners forbidden from returning? Why did the soil near the chapel test positive for trace elements, only found in volcanic craters and meteor impact zones? One of the archivists made a mistake. He opened a door beneath the chapel, a hidden stair, no record of it in any blueprint, no mention in 200 years of monastery records. At the bottom was a chamber, circular, lined with iron crosses, bent inward, in the center a stone basin, filled not with holy water, but what looked like ink, moving on its own, shifting like it was breathing. He didn't touch it,
But he spoke one word, aloud by accident, and every candle in the convent relit itself, even the ones they'd removed days earlier, even the ones buried in storage crates. He collapsed that night, mumbling syllables that matched no known language, his hands frozen in the shape of a prayer he never learned. The diocese closed the case quietly, sealed the chamber, removed all mentions of St. Mary's from official Vatican registries. The 23 nuns were declared transferred. But no records exist of their destination. No convent received them. No letters were ever sent, and no funerals were held. Only one name remains in the records, handwritten on a Vatican clearance form, stamped 3 days after the event, Remiel underlined twice. Next to it, one word: witness, and nothing more. The local priest, Father Adrian, was the only one who stayed behind. He refused to leave the grounds, even after the archivists warned him, even after the diocese revoked his standing. He had served there for 31 years, buried half the town, baptized the other half. He said he owed the sisters more than obedience. He owed them remembrance. But the night after the Vatican crew left, something changed. He stopped opening the doors of the chapel, stopped answering knocks. Neighbors said they heard singing from inside, but not hymns, voices rising in old, breathless chants, words that didn't sound Latin or human. A week later, his front door was found open, his rosary burned into the floorboards, and behind the altar, written in ash, was a single phrase they sang to something older. No sign of Father Adrian, no sign of struggle, no blood, just silence. And beneath that silence, a hum, low, mechanical, like gears turning beneath the earth. Local utility records showed a spike in electromagnetic activity centered around the basement of St. Mary's. For exactly 3 minutes, every radio in town crackled alive, each one playing the same sound, not static, not speech, but organ music, layered over distant voices, like a choir recorded in reverse. One woman swore she recognized a voice. Her sister, Sister Constance, one of the 23. She said her name, and every light in her house shattered. She never spoke again. That night, half the remaining townspeople packed their belongings and left Winton for good. Some say they still see the chapel lights flicker, even though the power lines were torn out years ago. Some say the bells ring at midnight, though no rope remains, no hands pull them, but the sound still comes, echoing across the empty fields, through the trees, into the bones of anyone still listening. And now there are rumors of someone trying to reopen the case, someone who found the original blueprints and noticed something strange. The original chapel was built on top of another structure, much older, much deeper, and never meant to be uncovered. The original foundation beneath St. Mary's was not made of stone. It was carved directly into the earth. No tools, no signs of excavation, just perfect, smooth walls. 23 steps led downward, each one precisely measured, as if calculated for a ritual, and at the bottom, a door, round, seamless, blackened with age, but humming with something alive. The blueprints called it Subterranean Level 0, but no records existed for who built it, or why. Only one man claimed to have seen it opened. An assistant from the 1972 Historical Survey. His name was Vincent Loeb. He said the sisters weren't just praying down there, they were tending something, feeding it, preparing it. He described rows of candles shaped like skulls, chants that never echoed, and a pit in the center of the room that looked bottomless. But when he tried to report it, The university revoked his credentials. The team denied he was ever there. He was found dead 3 months later, drowned in a shallow baptismal font, with burn marks on his tongue. His notes were scattered, but one phrase kept appearing, over and over, etched in margins, scratched into Polaroids, carved into the wooden desk where he worked. They were never brides of Christ. Not brides, but vessels, chosen, conditioned, and finally, taken. It wasn't a convent, it was containment, and for years the sisters held something beneath that ground. Until the ritual ended. Some say it was broken from the outside. Others say the sisters completed it themselves. Either way, the disappearance wasn't random. It was the release. And when they vanished, something else took their place. That's why the lights still flicker, why the organ still plays, why the walls of the chapel sweat in the dark, because the door at the bottom of those 23 steps was never sealed again. And if you stand long enough outside the ruins, you don't just hear the singing. You hear someone else start to sing back. In the winter of 1999, an independent team of restoration volunteers was sent to assess what was left of St. Mary's. They were not affiliated with the church. They were not told what happened there. They thought it was just weather damage, but what they found forced them to abandon the project within 48 hours. The lead architect reported a sense of pressure, as if the building were pushing back against every step they took. The paint had peeled in patterns that looked like letters, not Latin, not Greek, but older, twisting upward along the arches until they disappeared into the rafters. The chapel bell rang once, at 3:11 a.m., with no wind and no mechanism connected. When they inspected the sacristy, they found that the stone floor beneath the altar had cracked into the exact shape of an open eye, clean, symmetrical, dry at the edges, but warm to the touch. One woman, a technician named Lila North, collapsed near the choir stalls, mumbling in broken French. Despite having no knowledge of the language, she kept repeating one phrase, over and over, through clenched teeth, until she passed out from exhaustion. Il n'y a pas eu de pacte, seulement la faim. There was no pact, only hunger. They pulled the team out the next morning. The footage was seized, the records were sealed, and the structure was declared unsafe. But one image remained, a single frame from a damaged roll of film, blurry, burned at the corners, but unmistakable. It showed the sanctuary, empty, lit by dozens of candles, and in the center, the faint outline of 23 figures, standing still, headless, not from violence but from shadow, as if the light itself had erased their faces. Some who have seen it swear the figures move when you look away, just slightly, as if waiting to be called. And the inscription beneath the photo, written by a trembling hand, simply read, "They are not gone. They are beneath." The phrase, "they are beneath," was not poetic, it was geographic. 6 weeks after the failed restoration, a local historian named Ellis Green began cross-referencing maps of the St. Mary grounds, not the modern ones, but those drawn by hand in the 1800s. What he found should not have existed: an original architectural sketch, dated 1839, showed a full second structure beneath the convent, an underground level wider than the church above, twisting hallways, a central chamber, and a spiral descent that went further than any foundation should. But here's the part that made Ellis stop his research. Permanently, the blueprints were stamped with a symbol, not a cross, not a crest, but a crude carving of a nun with no face, kneeling, arms outstretched towards something above her. something that resembled a tongue of fire or a branch of bone. And beneath that, one phrase, written in a dialect that predates English entirely, roughly translated. It meant this: the ones who sing below will never age. The document had been hidden in plain sight, filed as irrelevant, buried beneath property tax records. Ellis never published his findings, because one day after discovering that symbol, he went silent. His website vanished, his phone disconnected, and his office was found empty, except for a single printed image pinned to the wall. A woman in a habit, eyes blacked out, mouth open, as if mid-hymn. With a second face emerging from her throat, Ellis's handwriting on the photo said, "I heard them. Once. And now I can't unhear." Multiple locals reported seeing Ellis walking the outskirts of St. Mary's grounds, late at night, facing the church, never moving, just mouthing words to himself, in a tongue no one could recognize, until one night he stopped showing up. No note, no body, no trace. Just a voicemail left on his sister's phone. Heavy breathing, and the sound of humming, layered voices, all female, all in perfect harmony, but recorded from underground, as if the choir had never left. They were never nuns, not in the way the church defines them, not in the way the world remembers them. They wore the robes, they sang the hymns, they carried the cross. But what they worshipped was older than Christ, older than Rome, older than Scripture itself. It didn't need altars, it needed openings. It didn't demand prayer, it required sound, constant sound. Tonal frequencies so precise, so ancient, they could bend the structure of memory itself. This was the real purpose of the St. Mary's Convent, not a sanctuary, but a tuning fork, a sacred structure built on buried stone, where acoustics amplified the impossible. The sisters were conductors, living instruments, trained from girlhood, to open their mouths and unseal what should have stayed hidden. No one noticed, because no one thought to look. Every baptism, every sermon, every hymn at dusk was a layer, a piece, a chord in the ritual, played across decades until the final note was ready, until the sound matched the shape of what lay beneath. That's why the church was sealed, not to preserve it, but to mute it. That's why the pews were nailed shut, why the bell tower collapsed from within, why the basement was filled with cement. Someone, long ago, understood what this place was, and tried to silence it. But the ritual had already been completed, the final harmony already sung, and on that day when the 23 nuns vanished, they didn't disappear into thin air. They were received by the very thing they had awakened. They were the choir. And now, they are the sound, not dead, not missing, just echoing, forever, underneath, waiting for anyone, stupid enough, to open the church doors and listen. There's a reason no one talks about St. Mary's anymore, not in the newspapers, not in the church's ledgers, not even in the whispers of those who remember, because remembering is dangerous. It invites something back in. The town didn't just bury the story, they rewrote the ground itself. Maps were altered, school books reprinted, local records scrubbed clean. No mention of the convent, no mention of the sisters, no mention of the 23. But memory is not so easy to kill. It survives, in symbols, in locked doors, in old audio recordings that don't sound quite right. It survives in the eyes of old men who look away when you ask about the church on the hill. It survives in the way the birds never fly over that part of town, the way the grass refuses to grow, the way even the GPS loses signal if you get too close, because whatever they try to seal in still murmurs beneath the stone. The choir was silenced, but the frequency remains, humming beneath the soil, waiting for a sympathetic ear. And sometimes, at night, if you stand still enough, and the wind dies, and your breath slows, you'll hear something, faint, measured, dissonant. Not quite music, not quite voice, but something in between. And if you listen long enough, if your ears adjust to the silence behind the silence, you'll understand the real truth. The 23 never vanished. They became part of something else, something that needed them to finish what was started centuries ago. And now that you know, you can't unknow it. You can't unhear what you've heard. And you may have already heard it, without realizing it, in the spaces between sounds, in the static between channels, in the dreams that start with singing and end with silence. Because St. Mary's was never just a place, it was a frequency, and once it resonates with you, it doesn't stop. You made it this far. You heard their names, felt their presence, watched the veil slip thread by thread. You didn't just witness the story, you let it in, and now it's in you. The silence of the 23, the erased voices, the songs cut short, they found a place to echo, inside your mind, not metaphor, not memory, resonance, because this story wasn't made to be watched. It was made to be completed, and you completed it. Every second you stayed, every breath you held, every chill that crawled across your spine, you helped bring something back. They tried to erase them, but stories only die when no one speaks them, no one listens, no one looks. You looked, and something looked back. You heard them, and now they know where to find you. Not to hurt you, not to haunt you, not in the way movies pretend, but in the real way, the quiet way, the way that slips into your dreams, in the moments before sleep, in the flicker of a candle, in the way your music glitches for just a second, and something unfamiliar breathes through the speakers. Now you carry it. You carry the missing, the forgotten, the ones the church abandoned, the ones the ground swallowed, and it will stay with you until someone else listens, until someone else watches, until someone else hears. Because the only way to stop the hum is to pass it on. So tell their story, whisper it, show it, spread it like ashes on cold stone. And when you do, don't speak their names, don't try to summon them. Just say one thing: they were never gone. They were waiting, and now they are heard.